recap. This is step 3 of this kind of 4-step process from getting from like just hearing a random statistic, right, a couple weeks ago to actually writing research paper, okay? So I'm going to go over a little timeline in just a second, but first I want to go over our purpose of this particular assignment as well as today and this week's deliverables, right? So purpose, this is bridging the gap between the research you have done or are going to turn in by Friday, right, in the annotated bibliography, and your final essay. So you're going to use your sources to move from the they say to the I say, and we're going to break down that framework, and then we're also going to talk about what's called a funnel framework, and I'm going to go over both today, okay? So this is our timeline, right? So if you go back to the documentaries, we watched The Truth About Reading and The Right to Read. The first one talked about adult illiteracy. The second one talked about adolescent illiteracy, right? And we read the most recent Nation's Report Card. 30% of 4th grade students in the United States, according to the most recent data, are reading at or above a 4th grade reading level, right? So they're proficient, only 33%, okay? Next, we covered the FSCJ library stuff. We did 2 full days of orientation, right? You guys logged in, reset your passwords if you had to, right? We explored the database, and then over the long weekend, we worked on our annotated bibliographies. Remember, if formatting is still stressing you out, we're not going to worry about that too much right now. What we want is content. So you're asked to come up with 4 to 5 articles in the annotated bib, and then for each of those articles, write 4 to 5 sentences. Today, we're going to cover the thesis and the intro. So forming our argument, synthesizing the sources, and then coming up with our unique contribution to that conversation. And then finally, we'll get to the full essay. Okay, so today's goals. Before Friday, I want you to just kind of have a working thesis, right? So this is your single, clear, and argumentative statement. This is your I say, remember that unique contribution, and then prepare a draft introduction. This is 150 to 200 words, must be in APA 7. Remember, font doesn't matter, but it needs to be double spaced, okay? And so all of this is going to be on Teams in your own document as well. Okay, so part 1, building our thesis. So the whole point of the annotated bibliography is to get a visual of the conversation, right? So debates about how to improve literacy are happening in every department, from high schools across America to Ivy League universities. And what you're doing in that is you're finding a couple of articles unique to your interests and then creating a visual of that conversation. Once you have done that and you've read, the intros and conclusions, gotten a feel for each source, you're going to synthesize them. There's a process. So number 1, where do they agree? What do they have in common? The part where they all agree is the status quo, right? That's how most of this is taught. Next, where do they disagree, or what is missing? This is going to be the problem, the gap, all right? And then third, what new idea emerges? So one of the things that I think doesn't get taught as well as it should is when you're writing these kinds of paper, it's not just what's missing that I'm going to write about. You're still taking what you agree with. You're just adding to it, right? It's kind of like taking a basic recipe online and sprinkling in your own extra ingredients, okay? But it's still rooted in that scholarly conversation. So what we're gonna do here is just kind of a quick exercise. This is how we would go about synthesizing two different sources, all right? So I'll give you guys a second to catch up. But Mason, you look like you're done typing. Can you read us source A? This is from Smith.
Argues that mandatory summer reading programs are essential to stop the summer slide.
Okay, summer reading programs, essential. Kylie, source B.
Presents data showing these mandatory programs have very low engagement and fail to motivate students.
Okay, so if I were to synthesize that, right, on the surface they look conflicting. But what we're getting at is, hey, both agree that the summer slide is a problem, right? But they disagree on the solution. Since mandatory programs are ineffective, a better approach is needed. This leads to my thesis. So for example, you could be somewhere in the middle where you might say, you know, based on other data, I don't think mandatory programs are completely ineffective, but they're not enough, right? Other solutions must be present in order to reach every student, right? So, let's talk about what is an arguable thesis, okay? The best definition I've heard is that it's the destination, okay? And the best analogy I've heard is, how many of you are driving now? Okay, I assume all of us are using Waze or Google Maps to get around. All right. Well, good. My, fiance Kim even tell you if the beach is east or west, so it's all right. So when you plug in an address, that's the thesis statement. That's the end goal, right? Everything in between, right? Turn this direction on beach, right? Head down to San Pablo, turn left, right? Head north, right? Everything in between, those list of directions that you have, that's the actual essay. Those are the body paragraphs, right? But the thesis is the address. You're saying, this is where we're going, now let me tell you how to get there. It's also an argument, it's not a fact, right? You can't tell me that the science of reading is about phonics. That's just a fact, right? I can't argue with that. It's also not a solution, right? So this is when you go to the I say. It's your specific answer to your research question. So, you're answering whether or not the science of reading is legit, and furthermore, are we incorporating that effectively, and are we doing enough with that alone, right? See, I just asked 3 different questions that prompt at least 2 different solutions. Any questions so far? So, I tend to learn best by looking at examples, both good and bad examples, all right? Coming from an athletic background, I like looking at my competition and then saying, okay, I can do better than that, and then I'm good enough, right? So, if you can do better than these, you're on the right track. But these are all examples I've seen over the years of teaching college composition. So, this paper is about the science of reading debate. That is a statement of topic, not an argument. I see a lot of rhetorical questions. People like to include these at the end of introductions. So, are digital-only textbooks bad for students? Great start, right? But that's your research question. A thesis is an answer, right? That's, should we go to the beach today? That's not, we're going to 18th Street. It's not an address, it's not a destination. Finally, the science of reading emphasizes phonics. Again, that's a fact. I can't argue with that. You're not providing a solution there. Good to keep going? Alright. So here is another good versus bad thesis. So Audrey, can you read us the bad one first?
The topic, the summer slide. The
So the summer slide, real phenomenon, students lose reading skills over the summer. Why is that a bad thesis? Maybe in our own words. So the answer's on the screen, but in our own words, why wouldn't you want that? Think about it.
Like you wouldn't expand on it, not just state a fact.
Yeah, it's a fact first, Joshua.
You can't argue against it.
Right. So if we were to instead say, while many schools rely on simple reading lists to combat the summer slide, data shows these are ineffective, right? A more effective solution requires funding community-embedded programs. See it? This could be like a library, right? This could be, putting up those little book libraries in neighborhoods, the little libraries. So again, if we have kind of another example here, so digital only learning has many pros and cons for students in America, right? Why is that bad? It's too broad, right? It doesn't take a clear stance. So once again, if we're to make that more specific, we could say, although digital textbooks are a cost-effective tool for schools, this trend is negatively impacting long-form reading comprehension, and districts must reintroduce physical text for complex subjects. I wish she had stayed for that part. That's okay. I was honestly kind of hoping she stayed for the whole thing in school. So, Dr. Sun, senior level English teacher, primarily teaches, let's be honest, like some lower level seniors, okay? But that's most of the school. Like the, dual enrollment cohort and the AP cohort represents only a small fraction of the school. So he has noticed in the last couple of years, and again, this is like kind of anecdotal evidence, right? But he is inclined to believe that our emphasis on like only using the laptops and StudySync and these digital textbooks, he's not convinced that's working for his group of students, right? And so that would be a much more specific focus, right? You're not making this broad claim about digital only learning. You're kind of narrowing it down to its application in a certain setting and argue whether or not that's effective. Make sense? Still with me?
So like a good thesis would be like narrowed down, like specific.
Right. And one of the reasons why we're kind of drafting our thesis and why the thesis and intro is its own assignment is so that we get the approval on Friday before like writing the whole paper, right? So I want you guys to trust that you're in good hands. I'm not just here like whipping out assignments and trying to knock out the semester. Like there's a very methodical process in which we're all involved, and I'm here to help you guys, okay? So for your thesis, here's a good litmus test. And again, I'm gonna post this on Teams, but I also want it available in your notes to reference, all right? It's good to be actually handwriting these down, helps you remember. So is it arguable? Is it specific? Does it answer the so what? And is it a destination, right? Is it an address? Okay?